We are going live. Can you share it if you don't mind?
Oh, well, we're live. What's up, people? What's up,
We're
everybody? Welcome
live.
to the Real Estate Power Play Podcast. A beautiful Tuesday afternoon. And we got some cool stuff to share with you. Mark is ready to bring the thunder. For those who don't know, Mark, the creative finance guy, Monroe. What's up, brother?
You know, hey, I'm doing well. We got the book.
Doing well.
So, anyways, I'm doing well. Gabe, thanks so much. We're running a little bit late. We're hearing Gabe's lovely story of a realtor trying to go around his back, as all
Yeah.
of us investors have done. I actually had the same thing happen to me last week. I tell you that, what happened to me last week on we are trying to put an offer on a commercial property, right? And I still
Yeah.
needed some documents, some disclosures, the kind of financials. And
Right.
the listing realtor was like, I want an LOI. So we went and we just did an LOI, got it out based off of the information. We figured, all right, get an LOI, then we'll get the financials in so we can finish underwriting it. Well, come to find out, the listing realtor used my LOI as leverage for the other buyer that was
Oh,
involved.
gosh. Yeah, that's the toughest thing about doing commercial whenever they're I mean, it's you kind of have to stay closed lips until really it's closed. So,
Yeah.
um
Yep.
well, for those who
I
wanted
know.
to know, we talked about we're doing creative financing, um exit strategies. We have some deals that we wanted to run through and just kind of share an ideal situation for those who are looking at doing creative financing. And so we have a sub two, and we also have a seller finance, or kind of a wrap that we're looking at doing. And so we wanted to go into that because I think that some people, Mark, don't know the other opportunities besides maybe a wholesale deal or a flip deal, or a rental property. And those are the three strategies that you hear the most, right? Of either I'm going to wholesale it, I'm going to flip it, or I'm going to keep it as a rental, right? And many people don't know that there's many other strategies that you can take on a property or look at a property that doesn't fit those specific parameters to make it work for you. And you can say, okay, well, if these numbers don't work, can we move it into a different type of strategy, right? And we do this often. This is the why I like Mark being on this call, is because Mark has been doing this. He even has a book over this, and we obviously are in the creative financing Facebook group also. And so, Mark, why don't we do some basics, all right, of where we see seller financing and wraps, go over those, and then let's go over some of the things that we're working through one of the properties yesterday, and what it looks like we're going to create a wrap on. So, Mark, high level, what's the difference between a seller finance type deal, a sub two deal, and a wrap deal?
It's a mouthful. All right. So it could go into quite a few stuff. So these strategies have been around for years and years and years. And I've been doing these, God, over 25 years. And until recently, they weren't popular. Wholesaling, the market's been taken off over the years. Everybody has been doing wholesaling and assignments. That's where most of the investors have come in. Um, During that whole time period, I was always doing seller financing. I would say 90% of my deals over the last, God, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, I've always been seller financing versus the wholesaling model. Buying properties through seller financing, wrapping, holding on to them, and then also possibly doing an extra strategy like a lease option. So seller financing is direct with a seller that does not have a mortgage on a property. It's just straight, free, and clear. The seller becomes the bank. Just like if you get a car loan, the financial institution is holding that paper. In this case, it's the seller that's holding the paper, and the collateral is the asset that they're putting secured against it as a mortgage or a deed of trust, whatever you call it. Just like a car loan, they have the title. You could actually do a subject to as well as a car loan or a different type of anything, but you can purchase a property subject to any existing. It could be I've actually purchased one with an IRS lien that was on a property, and it ended up falling off. So you're buying a property subject to the existing underlying liens. Typically, it's the first mortgage or second mortgage. That's typically the case, and especially in today's environment, these are very, very popular because, and I'll talk a little bit because didn't really explain what a subject to is, but they're very popular because you can acquire a property keeping somebody else's debt in place if it's a low percent, 2, 3, 4%, versus going to the bank today and taking a loan out like 7.5%. So it's very popular. So a subject to is you're purchasing a property from a seller, keeping the existing loan in place and the debt and loan, and you're purchasing a property and you're deeding it over to you. Um, so keep that in mind. So the seller, the original seller with the loans in place, is still technically responsible for that mortgage. So you got to keep that in place. You got to make sure that the seller's aware of it. I was talking to one of my students yesterday, and he's got a subject to on a property up in New York, and he explained it over and over to the seller, and the seller still could not grasp it. And I told the student, I said, don't even bother going forward with a transaction because the seller needs to really understand it. Even though they signed the disclosure documents, they still didn't understand it. And I even got on the phone and kind of explained it, but I just said, hey, you better not going through this transaction because they need to understand that they're technically still loan. So she had a VA loan in place. So she was worried about her VA eligibility because she went and purchased another property, and she was worried about that because she was max. She was actually underwater, quite frankly. She was going to have to come to the table with about 18,000, and she's been trying to sell it. And a subject to was going to be a great solution for her, so she didn't have to worry about it. This property's in New York, and she ended up moving down to Tennessee. So it was a great opportunity for her, but she just did not understand the concept of it. And I said, you know what, we sent some videos of an attorney, William Bronchek. He really explains a lot what a subject to is, and that's what I always recommend. It's coming from an attorney, so an attorney's explaining it. Um, she talked to a couple different attorneys that really don't understand subject to and realtors, and if they don't understand it, and they're becoming more and more aware because the market has shifted so much, but they have to. Most of these people don't understand what a subject to is. And on the HUD document, it says there's a line on there, subject to existing mortgage. Some people say, is it illegal? No, it's not. It's perfectly illegal. Perfectly legal, I'm sorry, to do a subject to. It's been around for years. The downside of it is if you're a seller and you're selling your property subject to, that lien, that mortgage is still in your place. So your buyer, if they stop paying, it could affect your credit. So keep that in mind. What I always tell people, and when I do mine, we set it up on auto pay. So if the payment is due on the first, we have auto pay automatically going out on the 20th of every month, making sure the payment's being made. And then what we do is in the portal, the mortgage portal, we set up a Gmail account just designed for that property. And whenever there's a notice or any emails going out, it goes directly to the seller, and it also comes to us in my accounting department. So everybody's on the same page so they can see everything's being paid on time. So that's what a subject to is. And then a wrap. Any questions, Gabe? Any questions before I get to the wrap on seller financing? Your seller financing is there's no mortgage in place. Okay, straight, and they're coming to bank and they're be holding the mortgage. Subject to is when your existing mortgage in place, like say, Rocket Mortgage or Countrywide, I'm sorry, PennyMac, or any of those lending institutions, they're staying in place with the seller, but you're buying the property and transferring it over into your name or your company name. Now, on a subject to, and I'm going to, sorry, Gabe, does also have what's called a due on sales clause. And this is where everybody needs to be concerned about. A due on sales clause they put back in place in the mid 80s, that if you transfer a property, I see a bunch of comments up there, but if you transfer a property from the original borrower to somebody else, the lender could technically call that mortgage due and say, hey, you got to pay this loan off. The mortgage companies and lending institutions know it's been going on. The main thing is they want their payment. That's the number one thing. As long as you make the payments, you don't have any issues. But just keep that in mind that they could technically do it, but in all my years, I think I've only seen a couple called due, and mainly because the payment got messed up, something like that, or a credit union. It's a smaller credit union, but as long as you're making your payments on time, that's great. So hopefully that kind of explain it. And Gabe, you can ask me some questions about it.
Yeah, that's good. This is good, guys. So those who have just been hopping in, and that we got some comments that we're going to go over real quick. We went over the seller finance model. We went over the sub two model, right? And now we're going to go over the wrap model. And the wrap is kind of a mixture between the two. All right. So normally the sub two is kind of like the first layer. If you want to do a sub two, you could do seller finance wrap also. But one of the ones we're going to go over is a sub two wrap. And we're gonna hop into that. Before we do that, let me see if this question here.
Yeah, there's a great question there
Yeah, let's go ahead
about
and
capital gains.
it's quite a bit. Let's go ahead and get that done for those listeners also who are just they just hopped on. So it says this: if a seller has been on the property for 3 years, I explained the benefit for holding on the capital gains, but as a benefit to sell, what is the taxes as this is not a short-term gain loan is $400,000 purchase price 600,000 or close to what is market value. Okay. Make sure I got this right.
It is a lot there that could be construed incorrectly. So we
Right.
want to kind of just go through a couple things. So they're on the right path of saying, hey, about capital gains, but if it's a primary residence, they're not going to get hit with that capital
Right.
gains. Unless it's, if it's, well, let's back up for a minute. If it's one couple, I think it's what, 250. If it's a couple, then it's 500,000. Anything more than that, it could be hit with capital gains.
Right.
So double checking that. But if it's an investment property from another, then they would get hit with capital gains. So that is correct. The beneficiary of spreading it out over time. It's a primary residence. Okay. So they would get hit possibly, and I would refer this to a CPA. But if it's a couple, then under 500,000 and below, they won't get hit with any type of gains. The 100,000, they would probably get hit with the gains. But they could also have, if they have a good CPA and they've done improvements over the years, they can also possibly offset some of the deductions for that. So that could be one thing. But the key, how I do it, is I give an amortization schedule and show them how much more money they're going to make holding. We had one that I was one of my students that we're talking about, and these sellers in North Carolina, they've been trying to sell the property. It's been sitting on the market for, I think, a little bit more than 90 days. So they're open to selling it, but they wanted to do a 3-year term. But the market, it was at high ARV. I mean, there's no room. I mean, if they had to bring realtors in and close, they were going to lose money. And in today's market, I don't feel comfortable doing anything less than 5 years because we don't know where the market's going to be. And if the
Right.
market's not there, you got to come to the table with money. So I didn't feel comfortable with
So
it. So what I
so
did is go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you were going to ask a question about
No,
it?
they just asked a question real quick. I wanted to make sure we got this clear. Let us know if you're talking about are you wanting us to know the taxes? Because really the tax strategy is not something that's in we won't go over that on these things. We're going over the actual real estate asset strategy. I just want to make sure that's clear so that we don't get any deep water ourselves.
Yes, I agree. That's why I always say you got to talk to an accountant.
Yeah, talk to your accountant, talk to an attorney that can help you out. But let's keep going though. Let's go into the wrap side of things for those who are listening just for this segment. Now, wraps are really fun. They're really cool to do. We work with an attorney based out of Dallas, good friend of mine. He's been doing this for about 30 years. And Scott, yep, the man, Scott Horn. We love you, brother. What is a wrap, Mark? How does that work out?
So, and there's another strategy. I'll explain that, but there is another strategy in between a subject to and straight seller financing, and then a sandwich lease option. There's a few of them there, but a wrap is when you keep the existing mortgage in place that you originate with the seller. It could be seller financing or subject to, and let's say, for example, you buy a property for $300,000. You're taking over existing loan at 300,000, and the ARV, let's say, is like 350. Let's just make the numbers easy. Okay. So the ARV is 350. All right. But the existing mortgage is in place for 300. The seller just wants out. And a lot of times they do. They're behind in a mortgage.
Yep.
I think, they just want to walk away. Do you want to use your scenario or do you want to just use the numbers that I just kind of make
When
it
you're
run?
popping numbers, let's go with what you got. Go ahead.
Okay. So let's just say it's simple math. It's the mortgage currently is in 300, but the ARV, the property is worth 350,000. So you got $50,000 of equity there, right? Typically, what I like to do if I'm going to sell it through seller financing, I like to sell it for a little bit more of a premium, because if you sell it outright for cash, you can get that $50,000. But if you're going to wait and that capital's tied up, you want to be paid for it. So typically I will bump it up like 5%, maybe 10%, depending on how long I'm going to hold it. Let's just say you're going to bump it up. Let's just say 5%. Make it really easy. So 350 plus 5% is $17,000. So you can bump that up and sell it to an end buyer, say $370,000. We'll make it really simple. Okay, so you're taking existing debt over at 300,000, and you can sell it to an end buyer for 370,000. Okay, so what you're doing is you have $70,000 of equity. So you're going to wrap that into a new mortgage to your end buyer, keeping the existing mortgage in place for the 300. And let's say you're having your buyer put $20,000 down, right? So $20,000 down. So there's still $50,000 left over. So you're going to wrap it in the new mortgage loan amount. And the finance is going to be 350,000. It's going to be the 300,000 of the existing first that's been in place, and then your equity difference of the 50,000. So the new finance amount to your end buyer is going to be $350,000.
Got it.
And then you can turn around and do a rate a little bit higher so you can make your monthly payment. You just want to be careful to make sure that whatever the market rent in that area is within reason of what you're selling your new property for, to make sure that you're not outpricing yourself for that market. So you can usually, let's say the rent is $2,500, you could probably stretch it to like 2,600 and 2,650. That's, you can kind of stretch a little bit and then back your numbers in of what your finance amount is, your term, and then figure out what your back out the tax insurance. So then that's the wrap. And now there, your end buyer is the one responsible. They own the property. They're taking the maintenance and repairs. You're sitting in the middle, collecting some monthly cash flow basically off of it, because hopefully your payment is lower that you're taking over. Like your deal, you're going to cash flow what, almost $600 a month that we talked about last night.
Yeah, something like that. Closer to 500, but yeah.
Okay, right. So what's the mortgage on that one again? The current mortgage on yours last night?
That one, the current loan is at 220.
Okay.
All right. The ARV is 270. So it's almost like right around exactly 50K of a spread.
Yep. Right. And I think you're going to sell it for like 95 or something like that when you add a little bit to it.
Yeah, you have to add a little bit of meat on there. And here's the thing that I've found out, guys, just by doing this for a while, is that there's also there's a pricing gap in some areas, where in some areas, like if you're in the $450,000 homes, some of this stuff, it just, 1 percentage point or half a percentage point escalates quite a bit. Right. So what you want to do, so this is a good price range. This is an average house income. This is actually in an area where there's still new homes being built, Mark. And so this is a 2021 home. So that being said, I know that if I were to take it on, or a new buyer would want to take it on, they're going to look at something that only has a 2-year roof, a 2-year AC. The structure of the home is current to market standards. There's a lot of stuff going. There's brick facade. There's a lot of stuff that looks really appealing to a buyer who might not be qualified for financing, or like maybe they're self-employed, or they might have a hard time financing. And so they're going to look at something they already know. I think every day we talk to someone who might be having a hard time moving out of their home and trying to move into another one, just with the market conditions and what's going on. So when Mark says, hey, this needs to be up to the current rents, let's say the rents for the neighborhood is going for about $2,000 a month, right? So what we do is we'll look and we'll say, okay, $2,000 a month, maybe $2,100 on the high side for the same square footage, right? Then what we need to do is we go back and find the taxes and insurance on this. Now, there's 2 ways to go about doing it that I know of. One is the simple way of just getting the bank statement with the seller, walk through with them, have them take a photo or whatever, and you can help them go through it, talk with them on the phone. Most of the time, it's pretty explanatory of what you're trying to look for, and it's on there. So principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, that would be normally underneath the escrowed amount on a bank statement. Mark, correct me if I go too far off, or bring me back in. But normally that's where it's going to show.
Dead on.
And then what's going to happen from there is you pull that out. So right now I think we're at 500 or 600 on this particular property of the taxes and insurance. So we back that out. Now I have 550 or 1450 a month after taxes and insurance that goes just to the principal and interest of the property. So then we go to our TI calculator, right? Or 10B2, sorry. 10, I look at you and I think of TI because of TIS. So
I hear you.
yeah, that's Mark's one of Mark's companies anyways. So we go to the 10B2 calculator, we look at that, and we say 1450 a month is what we can afford. So this is the cool stuff, right? This is where we get to decide, do we want to go up in price or do we want to go up in interest rate? Right, Mark? You're muted.
100%. Yep,
Okay.
exactly. 100%. So you got to play with your numbers and figure out exactly. So there's a lot of like there's a lot of investors do things differently. Some people want to go higher in rate, some people want to go higher in the payoff or your purchase price. For me, and I explained last night, I prefer to go a little bit higher in a purchase price because if they refinance and pay you off sooner, you'll get that money back versus if you're doing interest rate and you're waiting, yes, you're going to make money in the interest over the time. So you could play that a couple different ways. I know some people like they want to go higher in a rate because they want to be able to sell that note off into the secondary market. So it depends on what you're trying to do as well. For me, I want to hold. But if you're looking to sell it off in the secondary market so you can get some capital to redeploy it, then you may want to go higher rate and lower down. So you have to look at your strategy. I'm sorry, Gabe.
No, you're totally good. So now, guys, we're in the scenario where we know the dollar amount that we need to be at, and we're looking at two things. One, we're looking at helping out the seller from this current situation, and two, you want to look at the strategy of what kind of buyer am I going to be able to get for this type of property, right? You don't want to go into this thing without going and looking at, does this fit the type of buyer that I need? Does this type of model fit? Is there going to be a big enough spread? And then who would I want to have in on the property that would fit specifically for this type of house? So let's see what's next after that. So we do those things. We're shopping for a buyer. We find a buyer that works, right? They have the down payment. They have everything else. You go through an RMLO. The RMLO qualifies them. They're all set up. Now they work through all the loan processing side of things. And now you're in the process of creating the quote unquote, the wrap side of things, which is almost the same thing as if you were to just take a property and do a seller finance. We've done that on some of our rental properties before. We've just done it on a lot of different types of structures that we've done seller finance notes. We have quite a few notes. We have quite a few notes on our mobile home parks.
Hey, Gabe, something I want to say there is
Yeah.
So one good thing when you guys do straight seller financing and you're wrapping it, when you do your seller financing, you can take out the due on sales clause, so you don't have to worry about that, when you're doing that. So keep that in mind. So I love seller financing because then you can wrap those and don't worry about a due on sales clause. So you're perfectly fine on that. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Gabe.
Yeah, so now I have this property, right? And so here's the tricky part that I think all of us get stuck with, including myself sometimes, is that I got to write it out and go, wow, okay, wait a minute. This all makes sense, Gabe. However, this guy needs $10,000 to move on. How do I make this work now? Now, this is that tricky part. Everyone would love to take over a note, Mark. Everyone love to just take a seller finance, but this person needs $10,000 to move on, to move across town about 4 hours away from where they're at. They got to pick up the family, the whole nine. How do we position this part? And I think most people run into this, and I think that we're going to run into it more as the market shifts.
Yep, absolutely. It's do you want me kind of explain that, or do you want to go into it?
Let's dig into it, bud.
Oh,
You
it
got it.
happens all the time. Usually, yep. Usually, a lot of times, what I tend to do is, depending on the situation, we have one right now where they need, like you said, they need money to move. So what I tend to do is I tell them what we'll do is we will go ahead and pay for your moving expenses. We pay it. And then what we'll do is we'll do first month, last month, and security for the new place. This way, it's being paid. They're not just taking your money and not moving out of the property. That's kind of what I tend to do. Like I'll set up that way. Hey, no problem. We'll pay for your moving. If you want to do the
Wow, that's
movers,
really good,
go
man.
ahead.
That's
Yep.
so good, Mark, because like guys, who those who don't know, we have a couple properties, and I know we're just part of different networking groups and masterminds that I'm part of, where they didn't do this part. I didn't do this part, so now I got somebody in the house that doesn't want to move, and I've already closed on the deal.
Dude, how about the one investor we know that gave the seller $24,000, and then the seller wouldn't move out of the house, and
Yeah.
then
Yikes.
they got the media involved. The daughter went and got the media involved, and it's like that investor totally got and and then they also brought the mortgage current. So you got to be careful of that. So
Yeah. So
that's
that's
why
that's
I like doing it that way.
yeah, and that's one of the things. Like you got to watch out. That's you. This is why closings are important. In some areas when you were looking at this stuff, because I've seen this countless times when you're thinking you're helping out a seller, Mark, and they are in, let's say, foreclosure, or they're financially in a tight spot, or 90 days behind, or they got to fix the HOA fees or something else that might blow the deal up. And I think that everybody kind of gets kind of excited over, like, okay, well, I don't want to lose the deal, so let me go do this. Let me help you out. I got it under contract. And what happens is, if you bring any of those things current, no longer is there leverage on the property, right? Now, or leverage for you at least. What happens is now they have the ball in their court. They just took your money, they brought everything up current, and now they're no longer pressured to get out of the home, and they don't need to get out anymore, right?
Yep, totally agree. And that's why I do it that way. I'm like, hey, the moving guys. So you're kind of coordinating. You're kind of taking care of everything. You're talking to the next landlord. You're making sure the payments being, they got property. So they're in the process of it. So and then sometimes there's still some cash I might be giving left over, but I don't give that cash until they're completely out of the property. It sits in escrow at the title company or anything like that.
Yeah, so now we've gone through a full process of what it looks like. Mark has some awesome ideas of doing, and we do lease backs to different stuff. Keep in mind, if you do a lease back and it's going to be 2 weeks, you get that at escrow. Do not do anything else like that. You want to get them out of that property, want to make sure they're moving forward. I have one I mean, look, guys, here's the thing with
I
lease
won't
backs.
do a lease back.
They can
I will
break
not do a lease
they
back.
can break leases at any time, and they don't have to move out. So you want to make sure that whoever you're working with, as far as a seller, is in a good spot. And that's why I think Mark has that extra edge of going, let me do a little bit more work and make sure that you're moving on from the property. um he's doing way more than most people have done that I've seen, because you're helping them do the whole process. They're moving out. You're getting a moving company. Let me make sure, what moving company are you using? Okay, let me make sure, where are you moving to? Okay, let's double check that. And what that does is put that strength back into Mark's hands, and that I've seen that happen. I do lease backs. They don't bother me that much. I just make sure I get the whole month up front, and then if whenever they move out, then I hold back some cash from them. So let's say if they're supposed to be making 25K at closing, I'll do the month lease back, right? So I hold that in escrow. We have that, and then I have $5,000 in escrow, and that $5,000 is theirs the moment they move out. They can go to the escrow, the title company, but they have to move out, and I have to sign off on it, because I mean it's just an extra incentive for them to move on and to move out. And typically it works out great. But the paperwork and how you word things is really important at that point. So make sure you do that stuff.
Yeah, I won't do that at all. I'll wait and close. I'm like, we'll close when it's ready, and that's why I make sure. And then sometimes, if they have a problem trying to find a place, I'll put my admin or one of my people on it, and we'll go out and try to get them a place to make sure it's all lined up. But I won't close on it and have to deal with the headaches and put a deposit down, especially if I'm bringing the mortgage current. A lot of times. So let's back up here for a minute. There's a couple things that I want to kind of go over. Well, first of all, when you're doing this, when you're doing a wrap, you always 100% want to make sure you're using a loan service company that's going to service your wrap and loan. No questions about it. Do not do it on your own. It'll be a accounting nightmare. You have to do, the interest reports for the taxes at the end of the year. So make sure you do that to a loan servicing company. And the loan servicing company is going to charge anywhere between $15 to $40. So just add that. Make sure you do that in your closing documents, that they're responsible to pay the servicing fee. So that's one thing I want to point out. The other thing I want to ask you a question, Gabe, is, and I want to when you answer this, and I'm going to go into a couple of different quick strategies here. But why would somebody do a subject to? I mean, I'm going to keep the mortgage in my name. I'm going to transfer the property to you. What is up with that? Why would I do that?
Yeah. So normally this is in a situation where they need to move on from the home, right? So we have that. We have that they are so close to, like, for instance, this deal here. If they were to put it on the market, sell it on the market, wait the 30, 45, maybe even 70 days. And this particular, it's a new build neighborhood. So you have an older home trying to compete with new build houses. It's typically not flying off unless they really drop that price, right? So they're either going to have to drop that price, or they're just going to have to wait it out. Either way, you have commissions, you have fees, you have closing costs, you have everything else. By the time they get done, oh, and by the way, they've been in the home for 2 years. So guess what else you have to do when you live in a home? You have to get it ready for the market, right? And so now they're looking at, well, do I need to paint it? Should I paint it? They're talking to the brokers or the realtors, to get it up and going. So there's money invested there, right? And now they need to move on. And this is just one scenario that they have plenty of time on. There's other times where they're behind, right? They owe maybe $5,000-$10,000 and they're behind on their note, and they got to bring it current, otherwise they're out, right? What does that do? If you do that, now you're going to mess up your credit. So there has been plenty of times that we have done this for other people, and Mark and I talk about, it's like, man, someone just texted me the other day, thanks a lot. This is 2-3 years later, and you just bumped up my credit. Now I have a 740 credit score.
No,
Before
804.
804.
The
That's
credit.
right. I got a 740. Someone told me the other day, they're like, wow, I'm so glad we did this. I got it was like a 742. But 804, can you imagine that? Where were they at before? 620,
They
630?
well, they were behind when we took it over. I brought it current. They were behind 2 months, and she called up, and it was her and her son, and they were super happy. And just like the scenario that we went through, she was behind 2 months. Gave her $10,000 to move, and I did really, really well on that. I was cash flowing $700 a month, and I did made well over 100 on that. And you were involved in that deal.
Yep.
That was a
Your
deal we
Orlando deal?
brought you and yeah. So we did really well on that deal.
Yeah. So guys, that's pretty much, I don't want to go into any more because we're going to start hitting
I,
other strategies.
well, Gabe, I want to ask you a question. Let's
Yeah.
back up. So in the subject to why somebody would do that, it's pretty much you went through a lot of stuff. So that sounds like they're mainly in financial distress, these people that would do a subject to.
Most of the time, yes.
Okay. So what happens if they're not financial distress and you pitch a subject to, hey, keep the mortgage in your name, but I'm going to take the property over, and they're not financial distress. You know what they're going to say in the back of their mind? This guy's out of their mind. So you know what I love? They do. This is where my students go in, and we get students from, and I don't want to talk bad because I respect this person. He does really well teaching, but we pick up so many deals that their sub two students are pitching subject to the people that are not financial distress. And we go into other strategies and we pick those deals up all day long because the subject to students are just pitching subject to. And the sellers are like, there's no way I'm going to do that. So then what we do is we do what's called an agreement for deed strategy or a sandwich lease option. So those are great for creative financial strategies for sellers that are not financial distress. And if they want to make money wrapping it, you can take an agreement for deed. So it's the exact same process as a subject to or an agreement for deed. You sign the closing documents, but the deed sits open in escrow and it does not transfer it into the term. Or you do what's called a sandwich lease option. You do a rent to own agreement, and then it allows you to sublet it. And we get, you know how many deals we go behind subject to students that are pitching subject to, and the seller in the back of their mind is like, these guys are crazy. I'm not going to take my property and transfer it over. They're not financial distress. So that's where you come up with these other strategies as well. So you want to think of a tool belt. You want to have many different tools and different strategies in your tool belt because you have the wholesaling, you got the subject to, you got straight seller financing. It depends on what the seller is trying to accomplish. That will determine on the strategy. And then there's one other thing I want to point out, but I want you to jump in here and ask a question or any. You have a statement there.
Yeah, go ahead. Hit it up.
So one other thing I recommend when you're doing a wrap, if you're wrapping seller financing, agreement for deeds, sandwich lease option, whatever it may be, if you're wrapping, if a property, because oftentimes we all come across this, and you do as well, Gabe. When a property, you're taking a property over, it needs 50, $80,000 worth of work, but you don't want to put the money into it. You want to just pass it on to your end buyer. We all do, correct? So what I recommend, because normally we're going to come off the price. Let's say, for example, this deal that we talked about, say it's, the ARV on it's 350, right? And it needs $50,000 worth of work. So you're going to discount that price. So it's going to be about 300. What you want to do is, because you want to make sure that seller is going to, you're discounting the price. You want to make sure that the seller is going to fix that property. You want to do a second mortgage for that 50,000 or whatever that repair cost is. Put that against the property, or have it ready, but you don't record it until all those repairs are done. Because if a seller doesn't do those repairs and you got to take the property back, and they have a note for 50,000, you lost that. You got to, if they're doing it and you discounted 50,000 and you got to try to take that back, you're losing that out. So you want to make sure that it's being done, and then when it's completed, then you can remove that $50,000 note. If they don't do the repairs, then you leave that $50,000 note, because you may have to come in and fix the property anyways. Does that make sense?
Totally. Totally. Guys, as you can tell, there is a lot of information here that we just dropped that was really good. And we hammered it out in like less than 40 minutes. So this is quite a bit. What's that?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
This could go on for hours.
Yes. And guys, whenever I started learning this, just to let you guys know, when I started getting into this, I would meet with some friends at Rudy's Barbecue. There was about 7 of us, and we would eat some barbecue food, Texan good food, and we would just talk about creating notes, right? And that's when I started getting into all this stuff. And we would bring a property. What do you think about this? I'm creating this note, so and so from there. So it takes a while. So guys, I think that's it. Mark, are you ready to hop off and let everyone get going?
Oh, if I can find my mute here. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody has any questions on any of this stuff, feel free to reach out to us. You can find us in our bios on whatever podcast you're listening to us, wherever we're streaming. Like us, share us, and feel free to reach out to either one of us. We'll be more than happy to help, and possibly JV on a deal, or if you want to be in any of our programs.
All right, guys. We'll see you later. Peace.
Great job. Take care, man.